Hello, beautiful being, and welcome back to the Kajeology podcast. I am so excited today to have my friend Demitra Carter join us on the podcast. Demi and I met a few summers ago. It must have been summer of 2021. I was living in my van, and we both took an aerial class with Renee Guay, who is also on the podcast. And from there, our paths just kept crossing in the Truckee, Tahoe area. And now I have the privilege and so much gratitude to be able to join Demitra and her husband Phil in these really beautiful sweat lodge ceremonies, Lakota style ceremonies that we get to be a part of on a monthly basis here in the Tahoe area. And Demi is up to some really beautiful things here and has some really beautiful offerings. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast. Demi, welcome to the podcast.
Mm. Thank you, Katie. What a
Yeah.
pleasure to be here. Thanks for, facilitating this and being curious about more of the layers of who I am in the world.
Yeah.
Um,
I would love to know like what are the layers of who you are in the world? What are your offerings? What's your passion and why are you here?
yeah, well, I'm born and raised in Truckee,
Mhm.
California, where we met. I've been here a majority of my life, but was gone for probably 10 years, and that was like the bulk of where I met my husband, my soul family, got introduced to some really beautiful and special and helpful ceremonies and rituals um, that come from lineages all over, primarily, North and South and Central America. Um, and yeah, in that time frame, I was becoming a body worker. So I'm a massage therapist and have been for 10 years. And that just fascination of the body and how we move through the world and how our body stores or doesn't store, information and knowledge and is fascinating to me. Um, and within that wove the rites of passage way of life, with birth and death being kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and then everything in between, right? So, how we exist from the moment that we take our first breath to the moment that we take our last breath. And so, naturally, birth work came in. And I did that much before I had my own kids, as far as the training and really the fascination. But some birth workers don't have kids and they're amazing at it. I felt like it I couldn't really ever embody into the birth work until I really went through that portal myself, and that was just my story, which is not everybody's, like I said. So, was kind of a long time student before I had kids, maybe about 5 years, and then had my first child, who's 6. His name is Cypress. Tried to start a business in between that time with interweaving, the rites of passage, the ritual, the birth. Got pregnant again with my second child, Solana. And now I'm actually pregnant again with my third. But in the time that second baby, and now I've had this kind of slow creation process. It's kind of really been from for 10 to 12 years, it's been in the making. And now it's going to change again. So there's just that sort of constant evolution when really being embodied in the rites of passage, that nothing is really ever staying the same. And so how are we meeting it, to not get fixed or stuck in this is who I am and this is how it works, because life will always present different sort of ways to be embodied in your values and beliefs. And so this is my rendition, whatever, 444, to, yeah, just finding what I'm meant to be doing right here, right now, in this moment.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that and how our journeys, while they're along the same thread, tend to take us in a variety of different directions. I know my entrepreneurial journey has been that way too, or it was like podcasting and coaching and content creation and like all these different avenues to share our work in the world and ways to display it, but at the root of it has always kind of been a similar thread. I do want to jump into all of the different ways that you serve and, specifically the birth work that you're in. But I want to back up a little bit because I have not heard the story of how you and your husband met. I've only known you since I think when I met you, you had maybe just had Solana, or pretty recently
Mhm.
after. So yeah, can you back up just a little bit? Because I feel like there's just so much juiciness in that story based off of like what I know now about you two.
Mm. Yeah, well, when I was 21, growing up in a small town, it was like the first thing I did was move to San Francisco because it
Yeah.
was like I just need the opposite. Um, what a privilege to grow up in such a beautiful place. And yet, culturally, it was very kind of monotonous. There wasn't a lot of diversity. There's more now, and yet it's still, yeah, just that's to move to really the more diverse places was like that's what I want because I want to be again like a student of the world and not just so like this is my single point of view, right? So went to San Francisco, and when I was in San Francisco got this like really strong hit. I was like I have to go to New York. That's where I'm going to meet my man. And everyone was like, "You're going to New York for what? Like, are you going to school? What's your purpose there?" I'm like, "Listen, I'll figure that out." Um, so just honoring that younger version of myself that was never really like, this is the way you do it. And there's that one thing and you follow that path. But it's just like, I ended up finding a beautiful path, but it was like, I'm going to do that on my own, and I'm going to give myself permission to just figure that out and be a young adult in the world. And so there was that like intuitive hit of just like, I know my man is not in Tahoe. Um, I love Tahoe. I love the people in it. It just was like, this is not where he's at. So, or she, because there was exploration in that department. But, as far as like always knowing that I wanted to have a family, I wanted to be in that like sacred union, it was like, that's where he's going to be. And I went to Burning Man, probably maybe guess it was my second burn right before I moved to New York, like 2 weeks beforehand. And that was like that was a big moment for me for sure, because it was kind of like, and I'll speak to this more, but like in the rites of passage arc, it was like in the severance of sort of like saying goodbye to everything I once was in order to create space for everything that I was becoming. So it was a very strange time out there on the desert, and being with relations that were sort of always a part of my story that I was becoming more distant from, and just in that sort of grief of like, why does it feel so like forced to be in these relationships now? But it was like there was a lot awakening in me and a lot dying too. And right before the end of the week, these three beautiful women walked onto our bus and they were like, oh, we drove a bus also from New York. And we're like the Bluebirds, and this is our crew. And they were down the street, and there's still three of my best friends. And, we're, yeah, just those like open hearted, bright, community oriented, kind of connector type women. And we're like, when you get to New York, you call me, and it took me a little bit because I was like, I don't know, like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know if I'm ready to be a part of this like whole crew. And yeah, after like 6 months, like went to one of the shows that the one of them was performing in, Sierra Carrere. She's a character in the world, an amazing performer, and one of my best friends. And, they were just this vibrant and massive group of artists and visionaries and just, amazing humans in the world. And it was really the first time that I was like, oh, these are like, I'm with my people rather than like, I'm with these people. And of course, as a loving human who's like here for connection, I'm connecting to people. But it was like the first time that I was like, oh, wow, we're really on that, like our values are aligned. And so it took a little bit before I met Phil, but I met him through that community. He was very very intimidating to me because he's just gorgeous and was, yeah, anyway. Took a little bit to be like, I don't really know what to do with this person. But what was sweet is we created a really lovely friendship. Um, because part of the things that I really wanted to rewire was how I connected with men and women as far as like fawning or abandoning myself in order to belong. And so a big part of becoming a part of that community is I was like, this is not the community that I'm going to be like sleeping with everybody, like there needs to be boundaries here so we can create different kinds of connection and again honoring those younger parts of life of exploring, of being in intimate relationships whether they're short term or long term, but like again at that mark around 21, 22, I was like I just don't feel like intimately connecting with people who are not like where there's not something deeper there. And so what that did was create a really, yeah, strong friendship before we started connecting. And the beginning of our relationship had a lot of there was a lot to navigate because he was the ex of one of my best friends and there was a lot of, that dynamic of like how do you navigate, all these heart threads and do it as respectfully as possible, but also really honor like there's something here and I don't want to, again, abandon myself in order to make somebody else feel more comfortable when ultimately they weren't together anymore, And I never even knew them together, but it's like I knew their history and it was like that like girl code, where you're like, well, you knew. I'm like, yeah, right,
But there's a
and
reason
you're
why it didn't
done,
work out. Yeah.
Yeah. So like what are we where no one's ever supposed to be with this person again, But again to not like bypass her emotions too. And so the three of us, again, there wasn't much honeymoon phase for Phil and I in the beginning of our relationship because it was like navigating a lot of these like dynamics in intimacy and doing it as consciously as we could, of course, with whatever tools we had at that time. So lots of conversations,
I've
most
heard,
definitely.
yeah, I feel like I've heard a lot of beautiful love stories that begin that way, where it's like we both loved this person, right? Maybe as a friend or as a partner and didn't work out, but now, that connection was there potentially to bring us together, right? And that's okay. It doesn't have to, like you said, it's not like there's a stamp on someone like nobody's allowed to date this person ever again, right? And so I love that you spoke to that aspect of y'all's relationship. So you met in New York, and then you were like, "There's this magical place called Truckee," or how did y'all end up out here?
Well, so he went to the Burning Man, isolated from me, of course. We were probably there one of the same years. And afterwards, they took the bus and did the classic sort of like, I need to leave the desert and go to the water, went to Sand Harbor. And then I think I don't know, it was a few like very classic stops that they made, but it was the first place Phil said that he ever came to, aside from, because he lived in New York, various different places in the state of New York, but it was the first place that he came to that he really felt in his system right away that he was like, I'm going to live here, And so I also love that kind of like those little, how spirit speaks to us, right? Where I was like, I got to go to New York. And he's like, I'm going to live in Tahoe. And just kind of those little ways that it's like, oh, I'm just going to plant this seed and see what happens here, where these totally unrelated stories ultimately just come and then, yeah, now we've been married for 6 years. We've been together for 12, I think. And I mean, and we've had 100 different relationships, and that's crazy to me too, because yeah, I met him pretty young, but yeah. So when we did finally meet, he was like, wait, what? People are from that place? Like, what's that like? It's just like that is like the most beautiful place I've ever been. Like a childhood you must have had, which again was so special to have that reflection because of course in the just the growth and development, but not necessarily the industry, but just like that we're all doing that, right? It's like you're all growing and developing if you're choosing, right? If you're staying stuck in your old patterns, like, you're probably not doing that, and that's that's your choice. But then we have a lot of people stuck in kind of this like constant play and not really maturing sort of thing, right? So in that just reflection of like what a childhood you must have had, because it's like for me, I think too, in those younger adult years, it was like looking at all the things that I feel like I lacked in the place that I grew up and being like, I need more. I need something different. And so then again, to like meet this crew and this gorgeous man, who now I have children with and a family and have woven a beautiful life with, it's like, wow. The first thing that he said to me was like, you must have had a really special childhood, and to just hear that reflection and have that land in my body and just be able to be like, yeah, I did. I was extremely blessed and fortunate. And what a privilege, to have had such a strong connection to land. And really everywhere I've gone, while New York is probably a place that will always be home. And I'm so glad again, now I have family there and still some really beautiful souls doing incredible things in New York City and the state. Um, but everywhere I was, it was like the connection that I had with this place, this land, these mountains, this water, this lake. It was just like, it was like longing for your dearest friend, just being like, man, I have these people and I love these people, but I miss the trees and I miss the rivers and I miss like this nonverbal relationship that's like it knows me better than anybody else. And sometimes that's what I want to be held by most of the time, right? It's just like I just want to be held by the land. And so, I think yeah, it's beautiful that for however long we're here and however long we're meant to be here, because who knows how how life will unfold and what other little things that spirit has in store for us as we continue to grow. But being here on this land, I'm just like, yeah, this is home. And so glad I have a partner that was really able to, that it didn't feel like, oh, well, this is what I want, so get on board, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
because
for
that usually
sure.
doesn't work.
Yeah, right. It's like, we're gonna go here. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
But Tahoe's one of those places I'm very fortunate and grateful that I get to run retreats all over the world. And every time I leave, I get homesick. I love being here. I love this land. I love Tahoe and the whole surrounding area, the buttes, all of it. Everything from Nevada City, even Reno. Like, I've come to really appreciate the high desert of Reno. And it's just, yeah, it's such a blessing to go on vacation and also know that you're returning home to a place that's just so beautiful and loving and welcoming. And it's funny that you mentioned Sand Harbor because when I was working back in 2016, 17, I was working at a summer camp and my work computer had so many different background options. And one of them was this beautiful crystal blue water with big rocks. And I was like, this must be somewhere in the tropics. That looks great. I'll set that as the background on my computer. Well, turns out it was Sand Harbor. And I didn't know that until years later, after while I was working at that summer camp, I met a guy that was from Truckee and we fell in love and I moved to Truckee to be with him. And he was a kayak guide that would run trips out of Sand Harbor. And I remember putting my eyes on it for the first time and being like, wait a second. This is the background on my computer, like when I met him. So it's so wild that Sand Harbor, which is on the east shore of Lake Tahoe, for those who don't know, just crystal clear waters, beautiful sands and big, beautiful rocks you can jump off of. It's a wonderful place to visit. So, yeah. So, okay. So y'all fell in love. He already kind of had Tahoe on the mind, and then you both moved back here together.
Yeah, well, we had a few stops
Hmm.
in between, because something about, again, the kind of love that I feel like I have here and with this place, there was also layers there of identities that were no longer up, really present, and how people knew me. And I wasn't ready to come back to a place that people were telling me who I was. It's like I was still in that place of like, I feel clear about who I'm becoming. And yeah, I feel young, right? Like, again, children, even like babies, right? So you don't take your baby to introduce them to every single person you ever have known, in the first 3 months of their life, or even in the first year, right? Because it's like you're still getting to know them and you're still developing your bond. And so there was just a lot around. I'm like, yeah, I'm in a beautiful, loving relationship. Yes, I believe this is the father of my children. All of that is true. But up until the point that Phil and I were together, my love stories were not great. And so I didn't feel ready to come back to a place, even though we had been together, I think, for 3 years before we moved back to California. Um, to come back and then have people be like, oh, wait, you were like this, or I remember you were crazy, like whatever it was that they had to say. I was always a very embodied in my authenticity person, but yeah, I did a lot of exploring in my teens. And while now as a parent, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds edgy. But it's like then by the time I was 20, I was like, I'm good on all that. That's not really interesting to me anymore. And it's like I kind of did it in the safety of my parents' home, bless them. Um, but yeah, so coming back here it didn't feel right. And so we had a beautiful opportunity to move, to Ojai, of all places. And that wasn't a great fit for me. It didn't go so well. And then after Ojai, I kind of enrolled the community that we had moved to be there with to move to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, just like being at the ocean, there's dolphins there all the time. There's climbing, there's hiking. It pretty much always feels like spring. I was like, Ojai is so hot and there's no water. And I'm a mountain person and I feel like I'm suffocating from dryness. Like I need some sort of water. And then we ended up living in a house in Santa Barbara with two other families. Because a big part of too our story and our continued story for whenever we land in that kind of ultimate dream is to be in community on land, whether that's with one family or five families. And a mix. When I say families, that doesn't mean you have kids. It's like, just again, that's like that family is a value, where it's like we really want to do life together. And so that was really sweet. We had three of us under the same roof, and one child who's my godson. And I mean, it was a whole big experiment, and there was things that went really well and things that, those human dynamics, and this is mine and these are my needs and your needs are taking over, my needs. Like we learned a lot for sure. And ultimately that wasn't the long-term thing. Then we moved to Santa Cruz. We were there for a couple of years. That's where my son was born. And then it was like we were ready to come to Tahoe. Unfortunately, we ended up being ready right before the pandemic, and then a bunch of people came to Tahoe, and why wouldn't they? Again, like this is a beautiful, amazing, wonderful place, and why would you live in a city where you have to be in a mask and indoors and yeah, all of that. But it's our whole kind of idyllic plan of like we're gonna buy like this starter home and then we'll go from there, right? We can continue to tend to this vision. Maybe we'll flip it and then we can get land further out. We put in offers on like 10 houses and we're just like blown out of the water by like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was like, oh, okay, there's a different plan for us. And that was another, one of those big moments in our relationship of like the attachment of what we thought was rightfully ours to what actually was like, you guys still have some learning to do around like this growing up to be able to hold that big vision that you have. And of course, there's grief in that for me too, because I'm like, why, what do I still need to do? Like, what else can I do to be ready to hold that and be let go of all of my conditioning that keeps me separate, because I think we have this, again, idyllic view of what it means to be in community and village. But it's like, again, we're like indoctrinated in colonization where the individual is held up really high. And no matter how much work we've done, we were born into that. And so to go into those community spaces, there's a lot of letting go of my individual needs over your individual needs, and actually letting go, not disregarding that we have individual needs, but coming together and being like, now here's our needs. This is how we tend to our needs. And our needs include my needs. It might look different, right? But anyway, so we're still learning there, and we live in our single family home, and I crave for relations to live with me and for my kids to have aunties and uncles with them all the time. And yet there's still I think if we waited to have that reality before we had kids, who knows when we would have kids. And so, and kids are really big medicine because they kind of show you all the things that aren't actually working about our culture, because it's like, wow, this is a lot to do. This is a lot to do, like with just two people, and then keeping up with all of the things that we have to keep up with now in our modern day society, and be present with our kids and be present with our offerings and like be present with each other. And, it's just a lot to hold. And so they really show you like, wow, our systems are not really set up for the family unit to be really held at the highest regard. It's like, okay, I got to figure out how to get my kid in school so I can figure out my individual path again, you know, to be able to then support their individual path. But it's like, to unwind from all of those narratives is just not as easy, I think, as, again, my human was like, it's just super easy. We just get there and then we're there,
We just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just do it. And yeah.
Yeah, it was never, I don't think it was ever designed. I don't think we were ever designed to be raised by just two people. Like that just doesn't work. They say it takes a village for a very, very important reason because it truly does. Like it's just not, I don't even think it's beneficial for just two people to raise a child, right? It's like diversity in the education and the insights and the perspectives and the care. It's so vital. And I've loved witnessing you and Phil as parents. It's such a beautiful inspiration. I know someone gave you that reflection this past weekend after the sweat lodge of how wonderful it is to witness motherhood from a way that I didn't get to see or experience, and so just that diversity in approaches is just really refreshing. And speaking of motherhood, kind of wanted to go back into the spirit of birth ritual series and the rites of passages that you mentioned. You mentioned the like severance aspect of when you were, preparing to go to New York and you were at Burning Man. Can you kind of dive into what that is in reference to and just give us a little bit more information about that?
Mhm. Yeah, so the ritual series, the Spirit of Birth that I created was like, again, rendition probably six from childbirth education series, and kind of really like sharing information. Like the job of the doula is to inform. It's not to, help, or it's not to make decisions for people. It's not to project my values onto them, but it's to inform, because so often information is not given in a full way, depending on providers, right? Because then there's amazing providers that do that. And so, again, with everything, we exist in a very nuanced realm, and birth has all those nuances, right? Um, and it's very tender too. And so actually working in that realm is fascinating, because it's like you never want to make someone triggered by information. But it's like, again, being able to, I'm informing you, and how you receive this information, like that's totally, that's yours. I'm not responsible for it. I'm not going to not give you information so that maybe you don't have a trigger, right? Or maybe something doesn't come up, because then I wouldn't really be doing a good job. But anyway, so again, to not add more noise to the realm of like, you need to do all these things in order to prepare for birth and motherhood, because maybe you do and maybe you don't. And I think some of us have more to unwind from, most definitely. And yet there is a commonality. We are very busy, and our modern way of existing does have a lot of noise and a lot of expectation and a lot of like, I'm holding it all, everything happens because of me, right? And so this series was created, again, very much so as a totally new realm. I've not really done much online stuff. It's definitely not perfect, and yet it's like, what is perfect? Like, what is actually perfect, and what are we striving for here, right? Like, this is the message that came from spirit, and if I didn't give it, that would be me withholding something that was like, hey, you want to be a vessel, I'm going to send a message, please communicate it, right? Because we have these bodies and these voices, and spirit is everywhere. And yet, like, being a human is quite a privilege because we have these containers in order to share messages. So the essence of that series is actually it's to remove some of the noise and really just tap into the simplicity of your existence, and yeah, for sure that's a big thing, again, for some. And for some, perhaps they're more in the trust of their body, they're more in the trust of the divine flow, they're more in the trust of like, I only have control of so many things, right? And even if I did XYZ birth preparation thing, I can't control the outcome of my birth. And so the series, again, the essence of it is to give more kind of foundation in that in all the places in your body of like, whatever comes up, however this unfolds, I'll be able to meet it because I am regenerative, I am resilient, right? Like, I am more than what perhaps I even believe myself to be. And so they're really simple, they're really simple rituals. And so, like, where a lot of the inspiration came from is I do mama blessings, rituals before women go into labor. And that comes from traditional blessing way ceremonies, which comes from the Dene people, or Navajo in the other way that we know it. But again, to not take a ritual that is not mine and share it in this specific way, right? Because there's really specific things that the blessing way ceremonies had. Um, Ultimately, it's like, I call it a mama blessing because it's like, we're doing rituals like breath and sound and movement. All of us everywhere have access to that. And, sure, there's cultures and there's lineages that may have done it in one kind of way. It's like, all of us breathe and move and sound. It's like, you can't really put a stamp on that. And so in the ritual series, while I've been a part of a lot of blessing way, or mama blessing ceremonies, it's like, I'm not creating something that I'm like, now I'm going to put a dollar amount on it and you're going to buy it from me. It's like, I'm just giving an invitation in an accessible way that gets you into your body, into like, how familiar are you with your intuitive voice? How much are you looking for outside perspective, knowledge, or reflection that makes you feel like, oh no, I'm good because someone told me I'm good. But I'm like, but what if none of that was there, right? And what if our safety actually didn't have anything to do with our care team, but our care team then becomes facilitators.
Mm.
They become, they're just holding space, rather they are now the pillar of safety, because that I've seen in a lot of dynamics. some that go really well where they're like, oh my God, my care provider saved me, and some that then go really bad and then their care provider becomes the villain. And again, those are like big polarities, and it exists in the whole spectrum in between. But if we are actually more sovereign in ourselves, we could exist in the realm of disappointment and the realm of celebration without blaming somebody else or praising somebody else for our success. And so the series has, again, these really simple rituals that primarily have to do with breath and sound and movement. There's certain songs that I bring in, mostly like, they're chants, but like repetitive ones, that again, it's just like music or sound like that moves energy. And again, if we're able to, because some of us are maybe more comfortable with that form of expression than others, but especially if you're one that feels like that's dormant, not one that you're accessing, I'm like, it might move a lot of energy, right? And that doesn't mean those who access it more, it's not moving as much, but it's like, you got to try new things, especially in the realm of mystery. And again, it doesn't matter. Like I had done all sorts of different birth trainings before I gave birth. And by the time I was in labor, I knew nothing. And so it's like, there's a realm of mystery. And I think, again, some of us are better at sitting in the mystery of like, look, the outcome of this is unknown, and yet I'm going to meet it. And some are like, I'm going to do every single thing that I'm supposed to do my entire pregnancy. And then I'm going to have the perfect birth, and my kid is going to be the perfect way I want them to be. And then they have a child who's totally unexpected. Have never dealt with anybody like this human. And they're just humbled and humbled and humbled, right? And so it's like, yeah, anyway, lots of different thought bubbles in that kind of essence of this. And there's more to say, but it's like the preparation in pregnancy for giving birth and then that, maiden to mother transition, whether it's your first child, second child, third child, right? Because it's like, while I feel pretty embodied in my motherhood now, after 6 years, I still totally revert to maidenhood sometimes. And so it's like, it's a process, right? Of just like, I love that maiden in me. And also if I'm moving through the world as a woman tending to children and a woman tending to big visions and community and advocating for these different ways of being, but I'm constantly looking for approval of others, I might not be able to hold those things in the same way. So anyway, this series also acknowledges all of that, the transition of like, this is who I once was, and this is who I'm becoming. And so that arc of rites of passage, as I've been taught in various different ways, severance, threshold, incorporation. And severance, we're kind of, in short, coming to terms, acknowledging everything that has kind of brought us to this point. And so there's also invitation journal prompts to like tell your story, like what brought you here? Like what did you overcome in order to get to this point right here, right now? And again, to have that cathartic kind of release of like, wow, I've gone through a lot to get to this point, right? And yet some of it might be relevant and some of it might not at all. And then threshold is like you're stepping into that new version. You're meeting yourself. You're meeting these new identity. And then incorporation, which is the longest, right? It's like anytime after you're incorporating. Um, and I think too, we have a lot of pressure to feel incorporated into motherhood by these milestone marks of, you know, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever they are, they're different for different folks. But it puts a lot of pressure of just the like, I am becoming and I don't really know. And I'm doing this for the first time. And I may have had examples that were really wonderful and I may not have, right? And how do I not take perhaps my trauma and not project it onto my kid by trying to get it all right and being a parent? And so, again, the series is like to acknowledge that you're in the mystery here. And how do you become more comfortable in that place rather than actually just trying to control it all?
Yeah, for sure. When you were talking about the incorporation and how there's like maybe some people have these milestones in their brain as far as when you're fully incorporated as a mother, but especially, when you have that first child, like you said, it's like there's 6 months, a year, 6 years, 12 years, 18 years. Like those are all different phases of how you are probably being asked to show up as a mother, right? So it's like that to me, it seems like the incorporation would take that full time, if not and more. My question for you is who is the series for? Like someone like myself who doesn't have a partner, isn't sure if I want to be a mother, but I'm still open to the idea with the right partner if he shows up someday. Um, but I'm also like, I have two good friends who are actually have a lot of people in my life who are pregnant right now. So I'm kind of just like picking their brains. And one of them, she was reading, she wasn't sure she was ready. She knew she wanted to be a mother, but in her partnership, she wasn't sure she was ready yet. But she still started reading birth books and taking courses. And then, like, boom, she got pregnant. And I was telling her, I was like, well, maybe I need to read this like conscious birth book that you're reading. And she's like, careful because like that might be you. She's like that she believes that she started calling that in, right? Like when she started educating herself and mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually preparing, boom, it happened way faster than she anticipated. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, do you think this series is meant for someone who's already pregnant, who's trying to get pregnant, who just wants to educate themselves and incorporate these rituals in preparation? Yeah, what is your thought process on that?
Mhm. Well, this series is for pregnant women. And at any stage, I think like a lot of birth preparation kind of happens in the third trimester and, closer to your portal. But being that this is a self-guided series and, something that you can tap into in whatever flow you want, um, first trimester can be really tough on women, like whether that's the physical toughness, whether that's like the grappling with like, whoa, I feel so much less capable to show up to the things that I was showing up to, and so it might be really good in that first trimester, Some women are really tender on that of like, again, with miscarriage rate of just being like, well, I'm not actually going to do anything until we know that this baby's here to stay, right? But so it's like that personal choice. That being said, even if a pregnant mama were to start the series and then were to miscarry, there is, just a teaching or, like just an offering and like a tool around that baby, whether they stay and have your whole full term pregnancy and come out a healthy, able child or whatever, whatever that is, because again, there's the whole spectrum of what it means to have a physical body. And we can get really attached to like, well, this is what it looks like to have a physical body. And we have to be able to do XYZ things. But it's like, yeah, and that's really fixated in a box and a percentage of people with bodies because there's all sorts of different types of bodies and different abilities and like nonverbal folks tend to be pretty psychic and in that podcast what is it I've only listened to a couple episodes but it's like where they're actually really exploring that
Hmm.
in a bigger like research way because we love research
The
and
telepathy tapes?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Where it's like, it because you're like, they're in a different plane. Like, they're not existing in the same plane as I don't totally understand it. Right. And again, and those things, you're like, oh my God, I don't understand it. Therefore, it's not what I want. It's like, well, well, anyway, sorry, sidetrack. But
I appreciate that
again,
sidetrack. I think
like
it's important.
the cellular changes that happen from that spirit coming into your womb, again, you'll never be the same. You might try to go back, but it's like it's just how change and evolution happens. Sometimes it's really subtle and we're looking for the really big noticeable changes. But that's where we can also get stuck because it's like not everything is this big noticeable thing. Like subtle changes are happening all the time. And when we don't respect and acknowledge the subtle, then we do these say subtle harmful things, say to the earth, right, over time, because you don't see what it's actually the effect is for a very long time. But it's like, well, these subtle things, we believe they're not doing anything because you don't see the change right away, but change is happening. It's just happening on the cellular level, right? And so I think there's things there for those mamas too, because that, yeah, it's that might be their motherhood journey. They might have multiple miscarriages. They might, yeah, be in the question of their body's ability to do this, or what's wrong with it, or what did I do wrong, or what sort of things are in the ecosystem or in the food or in the water that's preventing me from having this like successful birth, right? But it's like, who knows what spirit has in store for you, because then those mamas might have 6 7 miscarriages, and then they have a baby, and then the medicine that they have to offer then women who are in that cycle of miscarriage is like something I can't really in an embodied way hold a lot of space for. I can do it in the sense of like the compassion and the mystery and the full spectrum of like the grief, you know. But there often tends to be a trust when someone has had a similar experience to you of just like, oh, you might be helpful as I navigate this really hard and painful thing.
Mm.
Um, but as far as mamas, who yeah, women who are still maidens, but maybe in that transition, right? Because it's like whether you have children of your own or not, it's like that archetypal transition from the like how we exist when we're young, right? And it is like, yeah, the beauty and the play and the like, yeah, it's such a big part of it. But it's like at a certain point, you shift from that. And again, we have a lot of cultural things with women and men that don't actually shift from that well into their 40s and 50s. They're still in that like mentality. And it's like, well, I mean, and some people are even that way after they've had kids, of just like not really maturing. But that being said, this is for womb carriers that have a baby in their womb. But I have thought about creating a series, for the maiden to mother, because that's like what I named at the beginning of our conversation is I've worked really hard to have my offerings be available in the town that we are in. And it's taken a long time because I have kids, and being an on-call birth worker is challenging with young kids. And so it's really been part-time, and that's why I'm a body worker and have these other offerings, right? Because all the things that we need money for. But now again, with what I've done with both my two first kids, I'll do with my third, which is I don't work, I mean, or I work minimally. I want my kids to be with myself, my husband, my parents, which I'm very fortunate that they're here, or an auntie or uncle, like I don't want a nanny. I don't want childcare that I'm paying. I want reciprocity and community and village with folks who want to be with children, because it's such a gift, really. It really like I wasn't that person that was really, really connected to kids before I had kids. And so it's like for me, I kind of that mother becoming a mother was pretty key. And now it's like I have multiple godchildren, like kids love me. I'm a lot more embodied in like a safe person for kids. But some people have it. They're just like amazing with children. I feel like I was always a little clunky, just like, all right, I'm trying to relate to this little thing, but I'm like, I don't really know how. Um, but again, like they're so innocent. They're just like and there's so much wonder and curiosity, and we could use that as
Mm.
adults more as well, and that's like it's like that dance of like being stuck in play and being stuck on the other side of like workaholism. But it's like we need to actually be in the middle. We need to play, and we need to have responsibility. But if our responsibility is at the hierarchy of all, and we don't know how to play, you should probably hang out with kids, you know and perhaps if you're stuck in play, maybe hang out with a more like, yeah, entrepreneurial, mature, like able to kind of hold all these responsibilities and still play just to like have those like different ways of existing um,
Hmm.
that we can see.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned earlier that that so you've transitioned from maiden to mother, but sometimes you said there's still that maiden within who kind of wants to step forth sometimes. What does that look like? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I I have a few wonderful maiden friends, that yeah, that do jump into my world, most definitely. But I think there's another one of those ways in which uh, our modern world has separated us is that it's like, well, maidens and mothers are different. We're having different experiences. And so it's like, oh, I don't relate to the maiden, or oh, I don't relate to motherhood. When really it's like, well, we need each other and we're all like, it's not this like singular isolated thing. Like I was a maiden before I was a mother. And so how do you not relate to me? But I think because there's not a lot of crossover, like when people have kids, it's like, okay, well, I have to hang out with other people who have kids. Because I want my kids to hang out with kids, but also I want to have relatability, with somebody because sometimes it feels hard to relate to someone who's like, oh, I'm in Guatemala, I'm in Mexico, I'm here, I'm like, and you're just like, whoa, I'm like kind of just at my house and in my yard, you know? Um, and yet like just because we're having this expression that's out in the world that maybe looks quite different, it's like here I am having my human experience and you're having your human experience, and we're probably experiencing some of the same things, joy, heartbreak, celebration, pain, disappointment, like it's probably all encompassed in whatever it is that we're doing. And so how do we actually not make it like, well, I'm a mom and so therefore, you don't get it. Because that is another thing I see of just being like, well, you won't understand. And it's like, well, no, we have to actually see our maidens and be like, of course you understand. And also like, let me share with you more authentically what my experience is without, you know, because I think sometimes moms don't share fully because it'll scare people, but it's like, I'm not sharing my full authentic experience to scare you or to validate this thing of like, see, having kids is crazy, like, did you hear her story? It was totally nuts. So it's like to just to be able to be like, I don't need to dim myself so that I'm more relatable. And please don't do that to me either. Like, share the wholeness of who you are. Um, but I think because a lot of folks don't really know how to come in and put their own kind of needs at the door, even for a short period of time, to be able to come and be like, with a new mom who's in a diaper and bleeding and isn't doing dishes or cooking, right? And be like, let me do your dishes and make you a meal, like, but it's like, oh, I don't have the skills to do that. I'm like, do you do your own dishes? Like, or does someone else do them for you just out of curiosity, right?
Hmm.
Because like if that's the case, you might want to learn how to do dishes at some point, and so maybe this is your opportunity to do that, and to do it in service to something else that's outside of yourself. But I think because it feels easier for me to jump into like, oh hey, well let me just like drop my kids off and like whatever, do something that is without my children, and like, which I need to go out and be without my kids and dance and play and not be putting their needs always at the forefront of just like having time to myself. But I feel like moms, and not to, this might not be everybody's experience, so like on a generalized statement, kind of are like, well, I'll work everything out to be able to fit into your world more. But it's like we just have to both do it. There has to be the scales of like, hey, sometimes just come over and do a puzzle with my kids and hang out with me on my floor, because like that's a big part of my world too. Um, and I'll also drop my kids off and go to what you're talking about if you're facilitating some epic event. Like, I'll support you, and I won't bring my child because they might not be welcome in that space. But again, America, or like United States of America, right? It's only a place I've lived. I've been to other cultures. I know other cultures though are better about including children. There's more spaces that are multi-generational. And
Mhm.
we don't have a lot of spaces like that here. And so that isolation of I only can relate to mothers, or maidens only relating to maidens, or elders only relating to elders is just a symptom of the separation of this kind of like, well, this is my experience and I'm here and I'm separate. I'm like, no, you're going to get old, and you were a kid. I don't, there, it's just like we're not having this isolated, separate experience. And yet it's like culturally, we're kind of separated in our generations. And a lot of people only know how to relate to people who are similar to them. So kids are not like us, you know,
Thank
they
goodness.
yeah, they freak out and show their whole expression. They throw their bodies on the ground, they scream and they yell when they're upset, and then they're like, okay, I'm good now, And people are like, please do something about your kid doing its thing right now. And I'm like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
You know,
Let him
you want me to
express.
change their experience? You want me to force them into something that makes you feel more comfortable? And yeah, that's definitely not everybody's parenting types. And I definitely don't relate to a lot of parents. I do relate to plenty, but I've been in relationships with parents that want me to parent my kids different for their own comfort. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that.
And thank
I want my
goodness.
kids to exist in this. I want them to know what it's like to engage with people who are not just here trying to have them fit into a box for their own
Mhm.
comfort.
Yeah, yeah. I know one of my favorite things when I'm working at the National Food Store or just in there and I hear like the wailing child, throwing themselves on the ground and having an experience, I feel a little bit of envy because sometimes I want to do that too, right? And I've been socialized and domesticated to not do that, but I know that there's that inner child in me that wants to just scream sometimes, and fortunately I created spaces where I can do that. But to hear that sometimes I'm just like, yes, get it out, express yourself. Um, so okay, this is a question that I ask everybody. Two more questions. First one is, what are 2 to 3 books that you think everyone should read? And they can be related to birth work, or anything that we talked about today, or not at all, whatever feels present to share.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, going into my book realm. Um, well, the 13 original grandmothers, I love. And that's, yeah, talking about archetypes of the feminine. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and one that definitely helped me understand all of the different types of feminine that are living within me. I'm like, wow, there's a lot here. And it's every chapter is a different story. And so you don't have to read it all at the same time. I appreciate that. And then also the connection to just the cyclical nature, right? Like, rather than the Gregorian calendar, it's like there's 13 moons. It's like why we have 12 months doesn't actually make any sense. So that's helpful. Braiding sweetgrass, also one that I adore. And again, in that reciprocity is pretty much the big theme there, and one that I think most of us can learn more about, even if we are really embodied in what that means. It's like, because especially because we're really in the culture where we exchange money, and that's the kind of way in which like I do this thing and you give me money for this thing. But it's like energy exchange and tending land and being with kids and making meals, like all of that is reciprocity. And we might have different access to different tools and different knowledge or different herbs, right? And so it's like that book is beautiful because it's like it speaks to the reciprocity with land and how we're not actually a virus, right? Because A lot of people want to say that about humans, that like we're the problem, but it's like the land also needs us, but we have to get in better relationship with it at large, for sure. So there's some great tools in there on how to do that. And then a novel. I really like novels. I don't read a lot of books that are strictly information.
Hmm.
Is Narcissus and Goldman by Herman Hesse. And that Herman Hesse is epic. Siddhartha, one of the books that maybe most folks on here might have read. But Narcissus and Goldman, it's like polarity. So you have one of the friends stays to become a priest. And so he's in this really strict protocol of what it means to be in service and devotion and on that path. And the other leaves the whatever it's called, the school, more or less. I mean, this is like also, it's interesting because this is like a very like Christian Catholicism type path, right? Of spirituality. But anyway, he leaves that place, um, Narcissus, and he goes and sleeps with all these women and has these connections. And it's just so poetic the way it's written, and it gives this like wow here, and they're friends and they stay connected and they have this wildly different experience of what life looks like. And it's just really helpful again with like I want to be able to truly like love my neighbor, to love someone who I don't understand, and it's not always that easy. And so I love that novel for the ways in which it shows like we are not all having the same experience, and we did not all come here to have the same experience, and so let's please not project what that's supposed to look like
Mm.
and then make myself better because I'm becoming XYZ thing, and this person is out here just making love. So yeah, those are some that I love.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, Demetra, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I know you have most definitely sparked the interest and curiosity of some of our listeners. And so, where can they go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty not super consistent on social media. I go in and out. When I feel like it, I'm there. When I don't feel like it, I'm not. But Demitra.Carter is my Instagram. Again, I might not be there for weeks and then I might be there, but I do have a birth page, but I haven't tended to it in a long time. So that's probably the main place. And then I have a website for my birth services. It needs to be updated. I'm pretty kind of like archaic in my in my technology realm. So it's like it definitely states like this is what I do, this is how you contact me. And that's DemitraSacredBirth.com. And then my Teachable, that's the evergreen. And I'm like, I don't really know. That link has a lot of different things going on in it. Um,
We
but
can we can
on
drop
my
it in the show notes for
okay,
sure. Yeah.
sweet.
Mhm.
But on my Instagram, it's there, the Teachable link. And even if no one bought that, right? Going to read about the series is quite informative in itself. Like it might even awaken a way in which we view birth, death, rites of passage, even in just being like, oh, I didn't view birth that way. I kind of viewed it as like this thing and I have to prepare for it. I need to go see the chiropractor and the acupuncturist and not to say that all of those things are not helpful, but it's like, what if it looked really different than, what even your peers have done? And you actually got to create the way in which you prepared for this. So yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely put all those links below in the show notes in the description and all the above. Make sure people can find your work and find you. And I love that you pop in and out of Instagram. Like I think that's something that is so important. Like if we're gonna force ourselves to show up, it's not gonna be good content. And like even though you don't post a lot, when you posted this morning, you're dancing and cleaning, you still popped up at the top of my feed, right? And so that just
Mm.
goes to show that like people are seeing it,
Mhm.
and like the people that need to see it are gonna see it. And so we're just loving and trusting in that process. Demetra, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your love with us. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and so much gratitude to you.
Thank you, Katie. It was a pleasure to be here with you.